Hello, my friends. It is Thursday, February 6th, 2025. So, in my morning daily brief, I try to focus on what's going on in the battlefield or military kind of engagements. And then when I get to the evening with the three big stories, which sometimes becomes eight big stories, today it's 10 big stories, I focus on things that are more political that can shape what will happen ultimately for Ukraine. So, here we're going to talk about a number of current events that are coming together to shape the way that the outcome of the war will happen. So we'll start with this. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presented Donald Trump with a golden pager during their meeting in Washington, D.C. Now, that's, of course, going back to the Hezbollah operation, the gold pager, it's a symbol of the pager. So the U.S. president received two pagers as a gift, a regular one and a gold-plated one commemorating the operation against Hezbollah. Trump, accepting it, said it was a great operation. In return, presented Netanyahu with a photo of them together with the inscription, "BB to a great leader." Okay, so I tell you that to tell you this. The relationship between the U.S. and Israel is historically been strong. Historically, Israel has been an ally of the United States. Whether you like that or don't like that, that's the reality. Now, the president in office can make that more or less intense. So Joe Biden was actually trying to back Netanyahu down significantly from doing more in Israel against the Hezbollah or whoever he was fighting against, whether it was in south in Gaza or north in Lebanon. Trump's not going to be that way. So Trump will intensify that. And they have a mutual enemy in Iran. And Israel hates Iran. Trump hates Iran. And so here in the Institute for the Study of War, Russia's victory in Ukraine is Iran's victory. A weaker Russia means a weaker Iran and vice versa. The success of one has become inextricable from the growth of the other. And so to connect those dots, so anything that Israel and the U.S. do that affects Iran is also going to affect Russia. And to the degree that Russia and Iran are tied together, it's bad for Russia as far as the U.S. goes. That's why I'm showing you what's going on with that particular story. Okay, big story number two. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio refused to attend the G20 meeting in South Africa. South Africa is doing very bad things. My job is to advance America's national interests, not waste taxpayer money or coddle anti-Americanism. Okay, so there's something to be said for taking a stand. There's something to be said for engaging. And this is the choice that Rubio is making as Secretary of State. So it's going to be very different than what we saw with the previous Secretary of State. Okay, now there's this article related to Rubio. Jennifer Bendry. She reports on Congress and the White House for the HuffPost and others. Asked a seasoned State Department employee how Marco Rubio has been received so far. And the reply was he has a minder, like a Trump campaign minder. A what? Someone in his office, not of his choosing, like with Tillerson, they sent somebody over because he wasn't totally within the fold. Now, that both is frustrating to me, and it also gives me hope, because Marco Rubio has a internal moral compass that hates communism particularly, and I would imagine that would extend to Putin and the authoritarianism that's there, but he has to walk a fine line within the Trump administration. So the frustrating thing is the minder, but the reason for the minder is because they don't fully trust that he won't be conservative rather than whatever the populist Trumpian kind of position is. So that helps me understand what's going on. Okay, big story number three. U.S. government stops funding Politico, New York Times, and Associated Press. I'm not sure that that's exactly the right way of explaining it because, to my understanding, these are funding subscriptions, not... Okay, so let's just read this. Elon Musk, head of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, announced that U.S. authorities are ending financial support for these media outlets. In all cases, this refers to the cancellation of expensive government subscriptions to these publications. U.S. Treasury Department, the State Department, and NASA have all terminated their subscriptions. Okay, so maybe they want their people to be informed, and they have subscriptions to the New York Times and Politico and the Associated Press. And now those people, to be informed, would have to buy those subscriptions on their own, or be just, reading other news. Okay, but that's not terrible. Now, what's bad are things like this with USAID. White House published a list of USAID's most ridiculous expenditures. Hundreds of thousands of dollars went to nonprofits linked to tea. Okay, that's bad. And then you see things like 47,000 for trans opera in Colombia, 32 for comics in Peru, and for promoting inclusivity in Serbia, and tourism in Egypt. I'm not sure why we're doing some of those things. Now, to shut down the whole of USAID seems like overkill to my mind. To shut down things that you don't particularly like that they do, that makes more sense to my mind. But okay, so you don't want to totally jettison soft power, but I think that a friend of mine helped me understand this. So I was having a conversation with a friend who worked for USAID for more than a decade, and he said, well, it's a nest of vipers. And I said, okay, but what is, we don't want to jettison it totally. Well, yeah, okay, but they're doing some things that they shouldn't be doing. And okay, but what he said here was really interesting, that what Trump was doing was like sending a shockwave by what they were doing by just shutting it down. So the method is the message. Like the medium is the message. Marshall McLuhan said years ago, famously, the method is the message, that there's a new sheriff in town. We're going to do things differently. This is going to be something you didn't expect. And so that same method is applied to saying that we're going to take over Gaza, or that the Panama Canal, we're not going to stand for this. And the first thing that Rubio does is go to Panama. I think that is the direction that helps us. It's explanatory to help us understand what Trump is doing and why he's doing it. Again, I mean, were it me, I would say, yeah, find the things that you think ought not be done and remove those, and keep doing things that are useful. But the intensity of it is part of the message. I hope that helps you understand what's going on there. Okay, so next big story. The UK has officially confirmed it will host the Ramstein meeting instead of the US. The meeting will take place in Brussels on February 12th, as announced by UK Defense Minister John Healey. I think this is a healthy thing. This is a positive thing, especially in an age of Trump, which is unpredictable, that the UK is taking the mantle and running forward with this. That's a good thing for Ukraine, I think. Okay. Now at that meeting, so there's an upcoming meeting on with Kellogg, and he's going to be revealing Trump's plan. I don't think Trump's initial plans, or what the elements of it, are going to be anything spectacular. Georgie from Ukraine Matters was talking about this, and he was very disappointed with the bits that we know, but these are the bits that we know. There might be something else to it, and it'll likely evolve over time. So I'm a little bit more optimistic than some others, but we'll see how this all plays out in given time. France has delivered the first Mirage 2000 5F fighters to Ukraine. Now, they say fighter jets in the plural, so I don't know how many there are, but I've only seen pictures of 2. So if anybody knows, put that in the comments below. I'm curious, because I haven't seen anything about the actual numbers. They may be adapted to carry Scalp or Storm Shadow missiles and AASM guided bombs. So, but hey, there's more now in Ukraine than there were just a day or two ago. So that's good. Next big story, Ukraine continues to receive U.S. military aid, but new packages are not yet being discussed. According to Zelensky, quote, "We have not seen a reduction in U.S. support. It continues, for which I'm grateful." So we're still working off the aid that's coming from the Biden administration still. And no new packages are yet forthcoming from Congress, but that'll all be worked out with the negotiations over time to see if any are. And the rare earth mineral thing, that may be enough to keep some kind of Lend-Lease thing moving forward, predicated on access later on to rare earth minerals, which aligns U.S. and UA interests very nicely. So we'll see how that plays out. And here's Trump's special representative Keith Kellogg responding to Zelensky's statement on nuclear weapons. Zelensky suggested if NATO membership's out of reach, Ukraine may have to return to nuclear options. And Kellogg said that the chances of that are minimal to none, or slim to none. Yeah, I mean, that would be bad to see something like that happen for the whole world as a cautionary lesson to the world. If the only way that you can fend off an enemy is to have nukes, then that sends a message to the rest of the world, you better get nukes. Okay, Denmark just revoked Russia's free pass and will now inspect its Shadow Fleet tankers, marking its first policy shift since 1857 Free Passage Treaty. Now, but again, Russia has caused this, and so what were you expecting? Okay, so this is interesting. Le Monde loses, this is the next big story, loses its Moscow correspondent for the first time since the Cold War. The Russian Foreign Ministry has revoked the accreditation of Benjamin Quintelli, the only correspondent for the French newspaper Le Monde in Moscow. He'd worked in Russia for over 20 years. The newspaper said this is the first time since 1957 that it's been banned from having a correspondent in Moscow. Again, Russia is becoming more authoritarian, not communist, but authoritarian over time. The Russian Foreign Ministry justified its decision by citing France's refusal to grant visas to journalists. These particular journalists, the French authorities claim, were actually intelligence agents under the guise of journalists. So it's a retaliatory strike. Okay. Jay in Kyiv, even with world oil prices down 10% in 2 weeks, Russia's fuel prices soar 15 to 17%, and that's due to Ukraine's relentless drone strikes. And as that keeps going up, that cost is going to keep going up, and that's going to be bad ultimately for Russia. And you see this kind of thing in Russian newspapers. Everything in Russia keeps jumping in price. I mean, you just keep seeing this. Let's just listen to about 30 seconds.
The Russian press continues to talk openly about Russia's economic problems. Front page of today's Moskovsky Komsomolets, the headline, Price Fever. In 2025, inflation promises to be a serious challenge for the country's economy and ordinary Russians. Everything around us keeps jumping in price. Vegetables, housing, utility bills, medicine, transport. Look at this chart in today's Argumenty Fakty. Over the last year, milk prices have jumped nearly 20%, the price of apples too, cucumbers 22%, beetroot 32%, butter 35%, cabbages 42%, onions 46%, and the price of potatoes by more than 90%.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not looking good for the Russian economy right now. Okay, next big story, Georgia. Let's turn our attention to what's going on there. Georgia is now officially a one-party dictatorship. The Russian-backed anti-Georgian Dream has rigged the system, crushed dissent, hijacked the country. They pretend to be strong, but their actions scream fear. Fear of people, fear of free elections, fear of accountability. Their fate is sealed. Dictatorships will fall. The only question is when, says the commentator here. Well, what's going on in Georgia? This is Joe Wilson, the South Carolina Republican congressman that I ran into the other day. Ivanishvili and Georgia Dream thugs sold out Georgia's port and mineral access to the CCP despite bids from the U.S. and EU. So to China despite bids from the U.S. and EU. So this just happened recently, and this is about the same time where Trump's talking about rare earth minerals for Ukraine. So it's all connected, I'm telling you. They now foolishly advertise their dictatorship by expelling 49 opposition members of parliament and brutalizing protesters despite intense scrutiny. Sanctions from the U.S. are coming, and the protests keep coming. This is day 70 of the protests, and it doesn't seem like it's abating at all. So that's what's happening in Georgia. Finally, this has nothing to do with anything in Ukraine particularly. I just thought it was interesting. Colombia's president, that's Colombia in South Carolina, not in South Carolina, but Colombia in South America. Colombia's president calls for cocaine legalization. It's as good as whiskey. Gustavo Petro sincerely believes that prohibition is only being upheld because cocaine is made in Latin America. At the same time, the Colombian leader is sure that since the powder is produced and used anyway, it's easier to legalize this business so that it starts bringing in taxes for good causes. Cocaine has become Colombia's main export commodity, surpassing even oil. Wow. Okay. So I don't think it'll be too long before this gets the Trump administration's attention, and like Venezuela and other countries around there, things will go bad for Colombia. Okay. Last little bit, Darth Putin, February 2022. We will not invade Ukraine. On this day in February 2023, you made us invade Ukraine. And then finally, my friends, there were 125 or 150, I think it was 150 Ukrainian defenders returning home from Russian captivity. They're finally getting to see their loved ones. This is Anton Gerashenko posting this, saying, look at the faces of those who waited for months and years, not knowing if they would ever see each other again. They're finally back together, and they're very happy about it. All right, that's all that I have today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.